Getting into the RC hobby can sometimes be a difficult thing to do. There are thousands of videos online, which is great, but sometimes beginners find themselves totally confused and unable to work out the best route into the hobby. Now, throughout the 4.5 years that I've been doing videos on YouTube, I have got hundreds of questions from people just starting out, and usually they're asking, what's the best RC car to go for? Do you go for a nitro, petrol or electric RC car? How do you charge a Lipo battery? There are just so many questions that people have, and I can't always get round to answering them all. I always love answering questions, but sometimes I do find myself saying the same thing over and over again. So wouldn't it be great if there was one video out there that beginners could go to pretty much get the answer to all of their questions? Well, that is what I'm going to try and do today. I thought it'd be a great idea to revisit some of the beginner guides I've done over the years and make one big video which covers some of the most asked questions on my channel. With endless videos online and some with contradicting information, especially when it comes to Lipo batteries. That seems to be one of the biggest things beginners worry about, and I think that's because Lipo batteries can be volatile. I just thought it'd be a good idea to cover everything in one video. This is going to be a long one, so of course all the RC enthusiasts out there who watch my channel, who already know this hobby inside out, this video is not aimed at you, it's aimed at beginners just starting out in the hobby, and I'm hoping that after watching this, it will answer a lot of their questions. Now, all the RC enthusiasts out there, I've got a job for you, because if I've missed anything or if you've learned anything over the years and you think there's some really important information that beginners should know, please drop it in the comment section down below, because I want this video to be a place where a lot of people can start out. And of course, people read the comments all the time. So let's go back to 2021 and answer the first question, which is, do you go for an electric, nitro or petrol RC car? So the first thing we'll look at is electric, petrol or nitro. What is the best power source to go for as a beginner? So let's talk about nitro first of all then, because nitro is very attractive to people who know nothing about RC and are looking to get into RC. If you enjoy engines in general, you enjoy the sound and the feel of a real working engine, nitro RCs are going to be very attractive to you. Now, nitro RCs are absolutely great, don't get me wrong, but for a beginner, there is a lot more setup and maintenance involved in actually looking after a nitro RC properly. As soon as you get a nitro RC out the box, there are quite a few procedures you have to do. The first thing is to break the engine in. Now, people have many different ways of doing it. You know, a lot of people actually like to let the car idle for the first tank, wheels off the ground. Second tank, run it around at a slower pace. And third tank, a little bit faster. Fourth tank, full speed, all that sort of stuff. Many people have different ways of doing it. Now, that is something you really have to do to prolong the life of the engine. If you skip that step, that engine is definitely not going to last as long as it probably should. So nitro RCs, such as my CGI one right here, may not be the best option for a beginner. They just require so much maintenance, so many different procedures you have to follow. It can get a bit frustrating and it can get a little bit confusing for people who are brand new. So we're going to rule nitro RC out on this occasion, because I really think you can actually make things a lot easier for yourself if you go for a different power source, which we are going to talk about in a moment. Now, if you have the budget as a beginner to go for something like this, fair play to you, because I certainly didn't when I first started out in the RC hobby. But would something like this be suited to you? Again, I am not entirely sure. Now, one of the things I noticed years ago when I ran 5th scale petrols was the fact that they are a little bit easier to use than nitro engines. They don't require a glow igniter, for example. They are a little bit easier to start, I always found. They are a little bit easier to tune as well. Overall, just a little bit more of an easier experience. The engine's a bit bigger, easier to work on, but they are incredibly expensive, and there are some better options available to you. Now, the one thing I would say, if you're considering something such as this as your very first RC, please consider where you are going to be running it. These things are absolutely huge. They're also really heavy and they can be really loud as well. Now, I used to run a Dominator pipe on my HPI Baja 5B, and that thing was incredibly loud. I think I actually have a clip of it, which I'll stick on the screen now. Now, that thing was incredibly loud, and that really used to upset the people in my local park where I used to run it. So would a big 5th scale petrol such as this be a good option for you? I really don't think so. I think they are far too expensive. They're also really big and they can potentially be really loud as well. So we are going to move on to the third and final power source, which I think is going to be the best option for you. Now, if you haven't already guessed, yes, I am talking about electric RCs. Now, I really do think electric RCs have come really far in recent years. When we consider how much cheaper brushless systems are and lipos in general, getting decent speeds out of some very budget friendly RCs is definitely doable these days, and certainly on a tight budget or a limited budget. Not only that, but if you are running a brushless system in your brand new RC, or if it comes ready to run with a brushless system and lithium polymer batteries, you will definitely be able to push some serious speeds, which will almost always be quicker than their nitro or petrol counterparts. Now, there are a huge amount of very good, cheap, ready to run electric RCs these days, which makes them a perfect choice for someone looking at getting into RC. It really does seem like the most easiest and painless option. Okay, so we have considered our options and we have established that the best thing to go for is more than likely going to be an electric RC as your very first RC. Now, this brings us on to the next thing, which is, do you go for a kit? Do you go for an almost ready to run, or do you go for a ready to run? So if you are considering a kit as your very first RC, this is not always a bad decision, because building a kit can really help. Should you need to fix or do maintenance tasks on your RC, you will know exactly how to take things apart, what goes where, and how to put it back together again. Now, there are of course some considerations when it comes to building an RC kit. You will have to supply your own transmitter, receiver, ESC motor, servo, batteries, charger, plus a lot more as well. You do have to bear that in mind, which is why again we ask ourselves the same question: is this the most viable option for a beginner? Potentially not. Now, if you have built kits in the past, or if you've built anything similar, you may actually get on all right with a kit, but I think there is another easier option. Now, picking out all these components may not be the easiest thing to do for someone who knows very little about RC, which is why we're going to move on to an even easier option in a moment. But there is one other thing we need to talk about, and that is almost ready to run. Now, with an almost ready to run, essentially what you're getting is a rolling chassis. Now, very similar to building a kit, you will have to provide your own electronics again. So like I mentioned, your transmitter, receiver, ESC motor, all the other bits as well, servo. You will have to provide all your own electronics again, but the only benefit to buying an almost ready to run or a rolling chassis is the fact that it is pretty much pre-built. All you need to do is throw your choice of electronics in there and off you go. But guys, do you know what? I think there's an even easier option for someone looking to get into this sort of thing, and that is to buy a ready-to-run package, for example, which will come with everything you need included in the box. Now, you really can't beat a good ready-to-run RC, especially if you're new to this hobby. A ready-to-run will come with everything you need in the box. It's almost always a simple case of charging up the included battery and putting some AAs in the transmitter. Now, it's a worry-free and painless option for anybody who's brand new to RC. I really think this is the best option for you. Now, ready-to-run packages are the best option because they do include everything like I mentioned. Now, in my years of buying ready-to-run RCs, I have noticed a lot of the time the batteries and chargers that they actually include in the box aren't always great. The batteries are usually of low capacity, and 9 times out of 10 they will include a trickle charger as well, which takes hours to charge even a low capacity battery. Now, that said, this really is the easiest option as there's very little to go wrong. But you will more than likely want to upgrade quite early on the battery and charger. That's just my opinion. There are a lot of ready-to-run RCs out there now that have actually started to include higher capacity batteries along with better chargers, but it's definitely something to think about before making your purchase. So we have established that an electric ready-to-run is more than likely going to be your best option. So what comes next? Now, the third thing to consider when buying your very first RC car is, do you go for a brushless model or do you go for a brushed model? Now, this really does come down to budget and how much you're willing to spend. Brushed motors have been around for many years in RC. Years ago, if you went for an electric model, it would almost always be brushed. We have to remember that brushless is still a relatively new power source in RC, and in recent years has only really started to become more affordable to most people. Now, brushless power systems and lipos, along with chargers, used to be insanely expensive, but as technology has improved, things have become more affordable. I definitely think brushless is starting to take over in the RC world. Now, no longer do you have to spend hundreds on a brushless system, Basic brushless systems can actually be had for well under $100 these days, which makes it a very viable option. Now, brushless systems do tend to be more efficient. You can expect to see longer run times. Faster speeds are also achievable, and also they tend to be maintenance free. There's no brushes to worry about wearing out, such as what you get on a brushed motor, and there's much more as well, but we won't go into too much detail because I don't want to confuse you too much. But yeah, now if you do decide you want to go for a brushless ready to run, to really get the best performance out your model, you do need to consider your battery choice. Now, lipos will definitely be the best way to go if you're looking to get the best performance out of your brand new brushless RC. If brushless is far too expensive, then let's not disregard brushed RCs. Brushed RCs are incredibly good value for money, making them an ideal choice for beginners. And not only that, if you crave some more speed or performance later on, you can always do a brushless conversion, which is something I really enjoy doing myself, and it's an excellent way to actually start out in this hobby. Now, let's take a look at the fourth thing to consider when purchasing your first RC. Do you go for a nickel metal hydride battery or a lithium polymer battery? Now, nickel metal hydride batteries are easier to use. They've been around for years. Not only that, they must be fully discharged before charging, and must be charged full before storing. Now, Lipo batteries don't have to be fully discharged, and ideally they must be stored with a 50 to 70% charge level. The charging must be done with a charger with a balanced charging option. This is always, I find this is always the best and safest way to actually charge a Lipo, is to use the balance option on your charger. Now, it is always good to store your Lipos safely. Now, you can use a Lipo safe bag, or you can use a metal tin or a metal case. Anything like that will definitely be the best way to look after or to store your Lipo batteries. Because we do have to bear in mind they can be volatile and they are extremely flammable. Now, you have probably seen or heard so many horror stories about Lipos and Lipos catching fire. Now, this is definitely something that can happen. Almost always it's because of incorrect charging, or the Lipo actually gets punctured in a big crash or an impact, or even potentially, I've had it in the past, where an ESC can cause a short, which can cause the Lipo to basically catch fire as well. But I wouldn't worry too much because it is very rare. As long as these things are looked after carefully and you do take the right precautions with storing them and looking after them, Lipo batteries are extremely safe. Now, another thing to bear in mind, if you do decide to go for a ready-to-run RC that features a nickel metal hydride battery, you will more than likely be able to upgrade to a Lipo battery at a later date. A lot of ESCs that come with ready-to-run cars actually feature different options, and they will allow you to select the option to run a Lipo pack instead of the nickel metal hydride option, which will definitely give you some more performance. Now, this brings us on to our fifth and final consideration when purchasing your very first RC. And the final thing we're going to talk about is scale and what size of RC to actually go for as an absolute beginner. So scale simply means the size of the vehicle in comparison to its full-size counterpart. So let's use this Armour Typhon for example. This is a 1/8 scale buggy, so this would be 1/8 for the size of its real full-size counterpart. Now, this is great, but what is the best scale to go for as a beginner? Well, to be honest, there's no real answer to that question. It really does come down to a few things, such as budget, the surface you'll be running on, which RC you actually prefer the look of. There's many different types out there, such as short course trucks, monster trucks, buggies, truggies. There's so many different types out there. It really does come down to personal choice. Also, another big consideration is the size of the area that you're intending to actually run your RC. If you are pretty much running in your backyard or your back garden, then you're going to want to consider something a little bit smaller. If size really doesn't matter to you and you have a huge amount of space to play with, then you can consider pretty much any RC you want, you know, even the big petrols, all the way down to the micro stuff. You really won't be limited. So there are many factors involved in picking out what size RC to actually go for. It's not something I can give you a definitive answer to. This one really will depend on you, what takes your fancy, and your budget as well. also where you're looking to actually run your brand new RC. Lipo batteries seem to be one of the biggest concerns for a lot of people, especially new people getting into the hobby. But let me tell you, there's absolutely nothing to worry about. I've been running lipos for years, and trust me, lipo fires are extremely rare. Of course, there's times where no matter what you do, something could always go wrong, but most of the time things are preventable. As long as you do things properly, you'll be absolutely fine. Right, back to the video, and we need to talk about the old school nickel metal hydride batteries. Now, when I first started in RC, roughly about 20 years ago now, nickel metal hydride packs were the go-to when it comes to electric RC. Times have obviously changed. The cost of lipo packs has actually come down considerably, especially when it comes to lipo chargers as well. The overall cost of owning a lipo setup has definitely decreased. Now, one of the good things about using lithium polymer batteries compared to nickel metal hydride batteries is the fact that they will offer you more power and also longer run times. Now, as long as you follow the correct procedure when it comes to charging and maintaining lipo batteries, they will be extremely safe. There is always a risk that they can catch fire, especially in an impact. If one of the cells was to get damaged, there is a very high chance that a lipo pack will catch fire. Now, when it comes to modern day RC, I really do think that nickel metal hydride packs will be disappearing soon. I think lithium polymer packs have really started to take over in the RC world. Now, due to the fact that they are extremely affordable these days, they really are the choice for most people. Now, I think what we'll do is discuss some of the pros and cons about lipo batteries. We'll start with the pros first of all. They are much lighter in weight, and they can almost be in any shape or size. Now, lipo batteries do also offer you much higher capacities compared to nickel metal hydride batteries, and they can also store more energy. When it comes to discharge rates, they do offer you a lot higher discharge rates compared to their nickel metal hydride counterparts, meaning that lipo batteries do pack more of a punch. Now, it's not all good. There are some cons that we need to talk about as well. Now, lipo batteries do tend to have a little bit of a shorter lifespan. I'd like to say that you'll be good for sort of maybe 100 to 300 cycles, give or take. The sensitive chemistry can lead to fire if the battery actually gets punctured. And also special care is needed when charging and discharging and storing and all of that sort of good stuff. Nickel metal hydride batteries can tend to be a little bit more forgiving, but obviously lipo packs are the more powerful option, which is why they're very popular when it comes to modern day RC. Now, let's talk about some of the pros when it comes to nickel metal hydride batteries. They do tend to offer you slightly longer lifespan than lipos. It's difficult to put an exact number on it, but I'd like to say 500 cycles plus, especially from what I can remember back in the day when I used to run nickel metal hydride packs. I do remember getting, you know, a lot of use out of a single pack, which was absolutely great. Now, they're not as sensitive and they don't usually pose a fire risk. Nickel metal hydride batteries are a lot more forgiving when charging, also when in use. They won't tend to catch fire as quickly, and they're not as sensitive as a lipo pack. Now, not only that, when it comes to chargers and storing these things, they are a lot more simple as well. Overall, nickel metal hydride packs are potentially the best option for a beginner, but I think everybody that's actually getting into RC does want to go for the best and more powerful option, which of course is lithium polymer batteries. Now, when it comes to the cons, they are much heavier, they are limited on size as well. The overall capacity is sometimes a little bit less than what you would see on a lipo pack, and overall they are less efficient as well. Now, nickel metal hydride packs do actually offer lower discharge rates, and they do actually lack a little bit of punch as well compared to their lithium polymer counterparts. So we are going to move on to voltage, cell count and capacity. Now, this is potentially where it may get a little bit confusing. Now, I'm going to put as much information on the screen as I possibly can, so hopefully that will help you out and help you to understand this part of the video. Now, a normal lipo cell has a voltage of 3.7 volts. Now, if we take a look at this 2S pack, this is a 7.4 volt 2S lipo, which means two single cells at 3.7 volts would give us our 7.4 volts, which is what you would see on a 2S pack. Now the battery is actually wired in series, so the two cells are added together, which gives you the 7.4 volts. This is why you actually hear people say 2S and 3S and so on. It literally means two cells in series. And it's also pretty much the same with a 3S pack as well. 3.7 volts times 3 is 11.1 volts, which is what you would find on a normal 3S pack. Now, if you've already plugged your lithium polymer battery into a charger, you may actually be able to see the individual voltages for each cell. You may be slightly worried because they will be showing 4.2 volts on each cell at a full charge. Now, this is normal. A fully charged LiPo cell will reach 4.2 volts, and if you've got a 2S pack, each individual cell will be 4.2 volts, giving you 8.4 volts on a full charge. Now, if you remember, I did actually mention 3.7 volts. Now, that is usually the resting voltage for a normal LiPo cell. Now, we're going to move on to capacity then. Now, when it comes to capacity, all this is a measure of how much power the battery can actually hold. You can sort of consider it to be like a fuel tank in a car. This is how much power the actual pack will hold and provide to you when you are running your RC model. Now, when it comes to LiPo packs, the typical unit of measure here is milliamp hours. Now, all this is saying is how much drain can actually be put on the battery to discharge it in 1 single hour. Now, let's use this tiny little 1000 milliamp 2S LiPo that you see here. This is 1000 milliamps. Now, this would equal 1 amp hour. Now, the capacity does actually determine how long you can actually run on a single charge. Now, going for a smaller pack will obviously give you less runtime, and going for a much larger pack, such as this 5500 milliamp that you see here, will obviously give you a lot more runtime. Now, when it comes to RC cars, I have noticed that the average is potentially 4000 to sort of 5500. I think that is the sort of sweet spot when it comes to RC cars. It's going to give you a nice amount of time when it comes to bashing. Anything below 4000 milliamps, you may find that you are replacing batteries quite soon. So 4000 to sort of 5000, 5500 milliamps is definitely something you want to be going for when it comes to RC cars. Now, especially in recent times, there are companies out there that are making huge capacity batteries. We can use Gensace as an example. They are making some huge capacity batteries at the moment, but the downside to this is they are absolutely huge, and you will have to factor in whether or not they will actually fit into your battery tray or into your model. Now, let's move on to discharge rate, because this is a very common question. What is the best discharge rate to actually go for? Is it 20C, 30C, 50C, 100C? What is the best thing to go for? How do you know what is the ideal discharge rate that you actually need for your system? Let's talk about that now. Now, when it comes to C rating, all it really means is a measure of how fast the battery can be discharged without actually harming the battery. Now, there is a really simple way of working out the max power draw for a lithium polymer pack. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to use this Avonic battery as an example. This is a 5500 milliamp 50C battery pack. Now, what we're going to do is actually times 5.5 by 50, and that is going to give us the max amps, or the max amount of power that we can actually pull from this LiPo pack. Now, once we've actually worked it out, we do get about 275 amps of continuous power that can be drawn safely from this battery pack. Now, that is well within this battery's capabilities. Going any higher or pulling any higher amps than this thing can actually handle, worst case, is actually going to make this thing deteriorate, and even worse than that, it could actually catch fire. Now, a lot of the time these days, some batteries actually have 2C ratings. You will find that there is potentially a burst rating as well, a burst C rating as well. Now, essentially, all that means is a really big increase of power that battery can actually provide when you are accelerating your vehicle. So what is the best pack to go for then when it comes down to C rating? What is going to actually work for you when it comes to your individual needs? Now, it really does depend on how much power your system is going to be pulling. Let's say, for example, you're running a 60 amp brushless system. Now, would a 20C battery potentially be a viable option, or is it going to catch fire like we spoke about? Or do you need something, potentially a much higher C rating, such as this 50C battery? what's the best thing to go for? Now let's say for example you were going for a model that was that actually required 60 amps to power it correctly, and then potentially a burst rating of, you know, let's say 100 amps. Now would something such as this 2S 30C battery be sufficient? Well, let's work that out now. So what we'll do is actually work out how much power we can pull from this 2S LiPo pack. It's a 30C pack, it is 2S, and it is 5200 milliamps. Now if we do the same calculation that we did earlier, we'll do 30 times 5.2, and it gives us 156 amps. Now if we're running a 60 amp system, we are well within the limits of this battery. If we're running a 120 amp system, we are more than likely going to be well within the limits of this battery. Now 156 amps is more than enough for a pretty mild to high-end brushless system. It could definitely do the job absolutely fine. Now you do have to consider, would a 20 to 30C battery potentially be good for your needs, because they will be a little bit cheaper as well. 9 times out of 10 they absolutely will. Going for something such as this, which is obviously a much higher C rating, this is a 50C battery, is potentially ideal if you're doing speed runs and you're using a very powerful brushless system which is going to be pulling a lot of amps. Something such as this will be your ideal choice. If you're going for, you know, pretty much a normal average model, and you can try and work out how many amps or, you know, what sort of power you're going to be pulling from the system using the calculation I showed you, something with a slightly lower discharge is more than likely going to be absolutely fine for your needs. Now there are other factors involved when it comes to the overall power draw from your system. You have to factor in your gearing, the size of your tyres, the actual weight of the truck itself. Your overall power output or the power draw may actually be a little bit higher than the number that we actually worked out, which is why it's always a good idea to go for a slightly higher discharge rating than you may actually need. The one thing I would say though, for most applications, a 20 to 30C battery will more than likely be perfect for you. So what we're going to do is actually charge this 2200 milliamp zippy compact LiPo that you see here. This is we're going to charge at 1C, which is going to be 2.2 amps, and we're going to use my LiPo safe bag as you see here. Very simple. All we're going to do is put the LiPo into the bag. We're going to leave enough space for the wires to hang out the side, and then we're going to go ahead and plug this in. So as you can see, we have got the balance lead plugged in. We've also got the main leads plugged in to the XT60 connector there. Now as you can see, the charger is actually set to nickel metal hydride batteries. We're going to change that now to lithium polymer batteries or LiPo. Okay, we're going to press start. So 2.2 amps is already selected because that was actually the last battery that I charged on this. But if you need to adjust, your amps, you can go ahead and do that now. So we're going to use 2.2. Cell count is 2S, which is 7.4 volts. But again, if you need to increase this or decrease this, feel free to do so. As you can see, this charger goes all the way up to 6S. So we go back to 2S, and then we're going to hold the start button, and that will begin to do a battery check, which will make sure that everything is connected properly. If it's not, it will tell you that there is a break in the line. But not only that, it will also tell you if there is a low voltage on one of the cells, and it won't actually charge the battery. But in this case, everything seems to be fine. So we'll hit start, and there you go. That is pretty much it. Now this battery pack is actually fully charged. As you can see, it is already displaying 8.4 volts. And as you can see, with the balance lead plugged in, we are pretty much sitting on 4.2 volts, which again, like I said earlier in the video, is pretty much what your 2 single cells at full capacity will add up to. 2 4.2 volt cells fully charged will give you 8.4 volts. Now guys, you must never leave a charging LiPo unattended. I really can't stress that enough. If you walk away and leave it unattended and it was to catch fire, you could potentially burn your whole house down. So please just be careful when it comes to charging your LiPo packs. Now, we're not going to go into it in too much detail today, but there are other ways of charging a LiPo pack as well, such as parallel charging. Now, I would advise against parallel charging because there's no exact way for the charger to measure each and every cell that you are charging. It will use an overall voltage to actually charge your packs in parallel, and I've been against parallel charging for years. Now, if you want to see how to parallel charge packs, leave a comment down below. We'll potentially do a more in-depth, advanced LiPo guide. If you want to actually see how it's done, I'd always advise against it, because you can buy a lot of chargers now which could potentially charge, you know, sort of 4 packs at once or 2 packs at once. You've got dual chargers and quad chargers and all that sort of stuff, which is why I'd advise against parallel charging. It is something you can do, but I would definitely say don't do it. So let's talk very briefly about LiPo storage. So you have just ran your model, you're not intending to run it again for potentially a few months. You really shouldn't leave your LiPo battery pack fully charged, because this will degrade it and it will reduce its lifespan. The best thing to do is actually use the storage mode on your charger, which will keep the cells sat at 3.8 volts, which is long-term storage, and they will be absolutely fine for months to come. Now, when it comes to storage of your lithium polymer batteries, many people do it different ways. Some people like to use a metal tin. Some people like to buy many LiPo pouches and store them in those. There's really no wrong way or right way of doing it. You just have to bear in mind that if these things were to catch fire, you want them to be in a place where they're not going to cause too much damage. I know there was a lot of information to take in there, but don't worry, I am going to include chapters in this video. At least that way you're not going to struggle to find what you need. If you're still confused about anything, you can head back and take another look. Getting into the RC hobby and picking out your first RC car is no easy task, but there's also some items that you should definitely add to your basket, because you will be needing them in the long run. Now, these items are very important because they will help you to get the best out of your RC car. I would say they're essential things that every RC hobbyist should have, and at some point you will probably need to repair or maintain your RC car. So I think these items are definitely worth checking out. So let's head into this section of the video. I thought it would be a great idea to put together a quick list of some of the things that are important for RC beginners to have in order to maintain and look after their RC cars properly. This is a very basic list of things, and some may even say the bare essentials to keep an RC in tip-top condition. This video has been created and intended for absolute beginners, so enthusiasts and professionals, feel free to skip to another video. So let's begin. Let's take a look at number 1. A good set of basic tools is a must. When I started out in the RC hobby, I used to rely on free and included tools that you sometimes get in ready to run boxes. The problem is, most times you get very small and basic tools. They're just not up to the job of, let's say, for example, stripping an RC down and rebuilding it, maintaining diffs, or changing out gearing. I would really recommend investing in some decent tools, as they will make your life so much easier. I've picked up a good set of hex drivers from Banggood recently, and I was pleasantly surprised as to how good they felt and have nice quality tips. And that just goes to show you really don't have to spend a huge amount of money to get good quality tools. I would say some needle nose pliers, wire cutters, flathead and Phillips screwdrivers of various sizes, a good set of hex drivers and a metal cross wrench are the bare minimum required to properly take apart an RC car. Using cheap tools will make your life a misery, as you'll more than likely round very tight screw heads and potentially ruin all the hardware on your RC car. So get yourself a good set of basic hand tools and you should be good to go. We move on now to some items that are definitely worth keeping handy around your workshop. Thread lock is an adhesive used on threads of bolts and screws to help prevent any loosening with vibration and constant impacts. Thread lock is used very often on grub screws, motor mount screws, and any screws on an RC car which may have a tendency to work their way loose or back out. You have to be careful with the amount used, as too much will make it very difficult to remove the screw or bolt, and heat may be required to remove stuck screws. Also try and avoid red thread lock, because that is extremely strong and difficult to remove. In most cases, blue will get the job done absolutely fine. It's always worth having some spare shock oils of various weights, as I can almost guarantee with hard bashing at some point you will pop a shock cap and all the oil will spill out. Grease is another thing you want to keep handy, especially when servicing diffs or working on gearing. I use automotive grease and I have had this tin for years, costing next to nothing, but some prefer to use RC branded grease, but in my opinion there is nothing wrong with the cheaper stuff. You can also get different weight diff oils, but not all RC diffs will be suitable unless sealed. Gorilla Glue, CA or Super Glue is always worth having around, especially when it comes to gluing tyres, back to rims or quick fixes. Cable ties or zip ties are always handy and can be used to secure wiring, tidy messy cables, or again temporary quick fixes of broken parts. Servo tape and double-sided tape is always good to have around, as you can use it to secure ESCs and receivers to a chassis. Finally, body clips. I must have gone through thousands of these things over the years. It's worth keeping some spare. Again, I can guarantee when out bashing you will be losing these all the time. Keep a variety of sizes depending on which RC models you run, and you should be good to go. USB chargers are a great way to get you up and running, but if RC is definitely for you and you have no intention of leaving the hobby, then upgrading to a dedicated mains powered charger will be your best and safest option. I've found in the past that USB chargers don't always balance a LiPo pack properly, which will reduce your runtime and potentially cause damage to your LiPo, or in extreme cases, your electronics. Proper chargers will have added safety features and will even tell you if there is a voltage issue, potentially indicating there may be a damaged cell. But hold on, it's not all about LiPo batteries. A lot of these chargers will charge multiple different batteries of various different chemistries. You can pick up some very good chargers these days for very good prices, and I will leave links in the description below for you to go and check out some of my favourite RC battery chargers. Cleaning and maintenance is a very important part of owning an RC vehicle. Dust and grime build up on an RC car isn't great, as this can cause premature wear to components and extra stress on the drivetrain. Using purpose-made RC brushes or even toothbrushes are an ideal way to eliminate dust and dirt from your RC model straight after use, especially when dirt has made its way into very tight places. Having some cloths handy is a very good idea, especially when working with oil and grease. Maintenance sprays such as WD-40 and GT85 are very handy to have around in your home workshop, as they come in handy when it comes to servicing metal components such as hinge pins and transmission parts. Having some bearing oil may also be a very good idea, especially if you run your RCs in wet and rainy conditions. A well cleaned and serviced car is much nicer to use. It's important to remember that the durability of a serviced and cleaned car is much better than a car that hasn't been serviced and cleaned. The functioning of the suspension and drivetrain of a car that's been kept clean and serviced is much smoother, and this proves how important cleaning is and how it affects the overall performance of the car. A soldering iron is a very important thing to have, especially if you run electric RC cars. I can almost guarantee there will be a time where you need to make up an adapter or you need to change battery connectors. Soldering can appear to be a daunting task for most people, but it's actually very simple and there are many tutorials available online. A good quality solder and soldering iron will make the overall process a lot easier compared to some very cheap ones you can find on places like eBay. I would advise checking out some reviews and getting yourself the best soldering set you can afford to make the process as simple as possible. I currently use a Weller SP80, which is an 80 watt soldering iron, and it has a very large tip which may be a little bit overkill for normal applications, but considering I solder XT90 connectors and some very thick gauge wire, it's ideal for me. Most soldering jobs when it comes to RC cars are pretty simple, and again, many tutorials are available online for you to follow. So there we go then, that is my list of essential items every RC beginner should have when getting into the RC hobby or starting out. Now, I'm not saying go out and buy all of these things now, as you probably don't need everything mentioned, but I think it's a good start if you plan on staying in the hobby long term. So at this point, I'm quite confident that you're thinking about going for an electric RC car. Now that's great because that's probably the easier option compared to nitro or petrol. You now know the difference between batteries and how to charge them and look after them properly. We've also covered 5 essential items that you should own as well to get the best experience possible out of this hobby. Now, people getting into the hobby do make mistakes, and it's all part of the learning process, but there are some very common mistakes that a lot of people make when they're first starting out. So that's what we're going to go into next. We're going to have a look at some of the most common mistakes people make. Now, we're going to hear from my good friend Matthew Simm, who did a collaboration video with me a while back. We did a top 10 and split it down the middle. We covered 5 mistakes each, but I've pretty much covered my 5 mistakes so far in this video. But that said, Matthew still has some very good points to make, so let's go and check those out now.
Today, I'm going to be giving you the top 5 RC mistakes that you can make as a beginner, and then head over to my channel where Ricky is going to be filming the other top 5. Stay tuned, watch this video, subscribe to this channel, then head over to my channel, links in the description, and subscribe to me and watch the other 5. Okay, starting out with number 1 or 6, depending whose video you watch first. So number 1 or 6 is going to be wrong connectors. Connectors are pretty simple. They connect together, joining the power from the battery to the ESC, but you can definitely choose the wrong one. If you're using a smaller battery such as a 2S battery or a 3S battery, then you'll be fine using a smaller connector such as this one on the left being a Dean's connector and the one on the right being an XT60. However, if you are using a bigger battery such as a 4S or 6S battery, then you are most likely wanting to go with something like an XT90 or an EC5, as running too much volts and amps through a smaller connector can cause it to overheat and potentially melt. Even worse, they could potentially cause a short circuit, which could easily damage and completely destroy your ESC, or worse yet, potentially cause a fire and destroy your entire RC car, and that's definitely not something you want to do. So it's pretty important that at all times you're using the right connector. However, if you're like me, I just use an XT90, whether it's a 2S, 3S, 4S, or a 6S, then I just use an XT90. As you know, an XT90 is going to be able to handle all the amps required from those batteries. And then that way, you know it's never going to be an issue. Coming in at number 2 or 7, is going to be RC maintenance. RC maintenance is so important, and being a beginner, it can sometimes be a little scary, but have no fear, it's actually quite easy. So here are some of my tips and tricks that you can use to help maintain your RC car. First tip, I like to use an air compressor after every single run. At least this way, we can blow out all the dirt and debris that might get trapped inside the RC car. It's also a great way just to clean your RC car in general. You can blow it out with air, and then you can use some tire shine and give it a quick spray over, then wipe it off, and boom, you've got a brand new car. Tip number 2, try and avoid water at all costs, as water can cause rust and just overall damage the vehicle, even if you have waterproof electronics. But if water is a must and you like to go a little bit crazy in the water and mud, then I highly suggest that you tape the inside holes of your wheels to make sure no water or debris can get inside and destroy your foams, because if water does get in, you'll cause the wheels to be super unbalanced and it'll just be a terrible driving experience. And if you do go too fast, the centrifugal force could completely just blow the rubber straight off the rim. And also, after running in water, be sure to bring along some WD-40 so you can spray down the bearings to avoid the water causing any rust. Just a quick FYI, WD-40 will destroy the oil inside your bearings, so after every run in the water, you are going to have to re-oil your bearings. And that brings us to the 3rd tip. Be sure to check your oil levels in all parts of your car. So you've got your shocks, you've got your diff grease, you've got your bearing oil, and do this every now and then, even if you're not running in water, as oils and lubricants are a key factor in keeping your RC maintained. Because for instance, let's just say you seize up a bearing, then that bearing can no longer spin freely, and what will happen is sometimes it will rust over and cause the bearing to spin inside the hub, causing the hub to potentially melt, or worse, you could put a lot of strain on your motor and electronic components, causing everything to heat up and potentially breaking one of your electronics. Number 3 or 8, which RC car should you buy? Should you buy an electric RC car like the one behind me, or should you buy a Nitro RC car? In my opinion, I would say if you are a beginner and you're just starting out and you don't have much experience, definitely go with an electric RC car, even if you really want a Nitro RC car, as you can upgrade to one of those in the future, but here is why. As fun as Nitro RC cars are, there is a greater learning curve. You're going to have to know how to maintain the engine, how to tune the engine, what fuel to run. Sometimes when batteries go flat, you end up with a runaway. I know there is some that don't do that. And also cleaning. Sometimes the engines can get a little bit oily, and then they end up just clogging up with a bunch of oil and dirt, and it's a real mess. Now, maybe some people disagree, but as for beginners, if you know nothing about engines, then I highly recommend electric. It's pretty easy. Go get yourself an ARTR. You don't know which one to buy, Beyond RC or myself both have a good list of top 10s on our channel, so go check them out. Electric RTR is just charge a battery, plug it in, and away you go. So in no way am I more biased towards electronic RC cars, as I do prefer the electric RC cars. They're a little bit faster and less maintenance, but if you do prefer the Nitro, then I highly recommend that you do get a Nitro once you've learnt the basics from the electrics. Number 4 or 9. So when you buy a brand new RC car, I know the feeling, you want to get it out of the box, you want to charge that battery up, you want to head straight out and go for a bash. But before you do that, you should definitely give your RC car a once over just to check out, to make sure you don't have any loose screws. They could potentially come out and cause a problem after even just your first run, causing you to break your RC car, and no one wants to have to replace an RC car that they've just brought and they just want to get out and have fun with it. You've got that anticipation, and having a break on your first run can really be a bit of a downer. Also, when it comes to screws, you have both plastic and metal. So you're either screwing into metal or you're screwing into plastic. And for plastic, when screwing up your screws, make sure that it is only finger tight. Also, do not use Loctite on plastic. Sometimes the Loctite does not set, as it's made to set to metal. Loctite could actually act as a lubricant, allowing the screw to slip out over time. Plastic acts like a nylon nut on a bolt. It adds friction, allowing the bolt to stay in there and not come loose. And like I said before, only finger tightens. Plastic is a lot softer than metal, so the further you go, it might feel like it's getting tighter, but you're actually going to destroy your threads. What I like to do when screwing into plastic is I like to get the head of the bolt flush against the plastic, then just give it a slight 1/8 turn to the right, just to allow it to be that nice, snug, yet tight fit, and don't go any further than that. Now, when it comes to screwing into metal, be sure to use Loctite. Loctite's going to make sure that that screw doesn't come loose, and you can go a little bit harder than plastic. However, do not go too hard, or you will round out the hex in your screw, and that's not something that you want to deal with. You're going to have to get out the Dremel. You're going to have to find different ways to get that screw unstuck, and that there is a real nightmare. I personally just use blue Loctite on all my screws. It's not going to be too tight to get out, but it's still going to ensure a really good bond, and it won't loosen up. And lastly, when it comes to screws, after every run or two, just double check to make sure nothing has come loose. Finally, number 5 or 10, and this one I think really gets a lot of people, including myself, and that is thinking that your RC car won't break. When I first started out with RC cars, I broke my RC car on the first run, and I thought it was completely ruined. I thought it was really bad, and that I just wasted all that money. But have no fear, RC cars do break, even the most strongest ones like the Traxxas X-Max. You'll find that most RC cars will break either a hub or an arm or a bumper, as these are usually the most common impact points on a vehicle, but they are also one of the cheaper parts on the vehicle. So if you're going to break anything, one of those would probably be the better option to break, and that's why I actually recommend, just another quick tip, not to use metal arm. Instead of breaking the arm, you'll bend it and possibly rip out the diff or do some major damage to the main part of the RC car. Every RC car is going to have its weak points, and every RC car is different, so I'm not going to go over every RC car and all their weak points. For whatever RC car you have, I highly recommend doing some research just to find out what its weak points are. And always buy a few parts just to keep handy, as no one likes to go all the way out, plan a big day of RC bashing, break apart, and then it's completely over for the day. So for instance, my X-Max, I tend to hit too many trees. My bad. That's why I always try and have some spare arms on hand, as that's what I break the most. So guys, I hope you found this list very, very helpful, and be sure to go over to my channel, again, links in the description. Go over, subscribe, go watch the rest of the top 10.
So we're now at a point in the video where I hope you're confident you know you're doing the right thing. And if you're not confident and you're still unsure about stuff, maybe you're still unsure about how to charge a Lipo, go back and re-watch that part so that you're not confused. And if you pretty much get the hang of everything so far, it's now time to pick out your first RC car. And one of the most asked questions I get, what is the best beginner RC car to go for? Now we're going to try and make this as easy as possible. You have two main choices. You can either go down the cheap Chinese route, and there are some fantastic cheaper Chinese cars out there, including the two fantastic Relalos you see in front of me, or you can go for an RC car from a big RC brand like Team Associated or Armour. Going down the cheaper Chinese route does have its benefits. For example, this new ROG1 by Relalo. This thing will do up to 50 miles per hour right out the box without you having to do anything. All you need to use is a 3S battery, and these are currently selling for around $150. In comparison, for the same money, you can buy something like an Armour Granite Grom. The Granite Grom might be a little bit smaller, but it's also a lot slower than the ROG1, only reaching a speed of 19 miles per hour. Whilst it's not always about speed, I have found these slower brush trucks can become boring quite quickly. Going fast with an RC car as a beginner may sound like a terrible thing, and yes, hitting something at 50 miles per hour will of course cause more damage than hitting something at 19 miles per hour. But the good news is, on a lot of these higher performance brushless beginner trucks, you can turn the power down on the transmitter until you're confident you can handle the truck properly. So hang on a minute, these cheaper Chinese options must be the way forward. Well, actually, no, it's not as simple as that. Now, we have to talk about spares and parts availability, because that's almost always an issue with a lot of these cars. And you do find that not many places will have local parts support compared to the bigger names in the hobby having regular parts support in most hobby stores. Most of the time you need to order from China, and packages can take up to 2 weeks to arrive, sometimes even longer, which means no RC fun for a long time. That's off-putting to a lot of people, which is why the bigger branded options are a better choice. This is one of the hardest decisions you have to make in RC in 2024. The cheaper Chinese cars are really taking over the budget market. Do you go for something that offers more for less, or less for more, because sometimes the branded stuff costs way more, but you will be able to get all the parts you need almost always the next day. Now, both have their advantages and disadvantages. If you're happy to wait a couple of weeks for parts to arrive, you really can get a lot for your money with the cheaper Chinese cars. But if you're like me and a bit impatient, you may want to go for a well-known brand. Now, the big brands out there are noticing what's going on. They know that these cheaper Chinese cars are pretty much taking over the beginner and cheap and budget market, and we're seeing new trucks coming from big brands like Armour, such as the Gorgon, the new Fury, and the new Vortex two-wheel drive. Now, these new trucks are really appealing to a lot of people because not only are they bigger, they also look epic. Now, these trucks may look cool, but they're also incredibly underpowered. A lot of these trucks come with old school brush systems, which, to be honest, in 2024 are not much fun at all, and it does leave you craving a little bit more speed and power. I can't help but feel that these trucks are just part of a big money-making scheme. Armour know they needed to bring new trucks to the market which would appeal to beginners, but a lot of the parts are insanely overpriced, especially for us here in the UK. Now, you would expect with a beginner truck, you're going to be paying beginner prices, which is true. You can pick these trucks up for a lot less money than some of the other trucks. Now, you would expect the spares for these trucks to be budget friendly as well, because after all, they are budget trucks. But I seriously struggle to understand why a slipper clutch for the Armour Gorgon is close to £50. The bodies are £60 plus, and a lot of the other parts are so overpriced as well. Now, this kind of makes me think Armour get you all excited. You buy one of these trucks, you're now locked in. You then go to buy parts, and you're a little bit taken back by how expensive everything is. I mean, I know they've got to make money, but is this the right way of doing it? I don't think it is, because if a big brand like Armour want to take back the budget market from the cheaper Chinese companies, you need to keep the prices of your trucks low, which of course they already do, but you also need to bring down the prices of spares, because that is putting a lot of people off. And if I was just getting into the hobby these days, I don't think I would actually go for one of these trucks. I'd probably be more tempted to go for one of the Chinese trucks. They just offer a little bit more fun for the money. Now, the spares for this may be expensive, but you can get them from pretty much anywhere, which is one of the most appealing things about these trucks. I just really wish they'd bring the prices down. Now, there are hundreds of different options out there when you're trying to pick out your first RC car. A lot of the time it does depend on budget. Some people will say $100 is too much. Some people would say $500 doesn't mean anything to them. But some of the most affordable RC cars can be had for around the $100 to $300 mark. So moving on to the next part of the video, where I'm going to be talking about 5 really affordable options in 2024 if you're just starting out in the hobby. At the number 5 spot is the Maverick Quantum 2 Flux. This is a fantastic 1/10 scale monster truck, which is aimed at beginners. It's 2 to 3S ready, it's brushless right out the box, and I think it's a solid choice if you're looking to get into the hobby and you want something slightly bigger than some of the smaller cars out there. Now, I no longer own this car because someone actually won it on raffle, but I have to say I do really miss it, and I'm very close to getting another one. The electronics on the truck are great, and that's because it is a hobby wing system. Right out the box on 2S, it also does a very decent speed, but on 3S it's just a little bit more fun. You're going to be popping wheelies, and I think 3S is the sweet spot on this truck. Now, when I did the full review video of the Maverick Quantum 2 Flux, some people did leave a comment saying they can't get these trucks in their country, and I have had a very quick look, and it does appear that availability is limited. Now, because of this reason, I was in two minds about including this truck on this top 5 list. Now, of course, for us here in the UK, availability is great. I also think over in the US, availability is also really good for them. I have no idea why these things are really hard to get hold of, but that's why I've placed it at the number 5 spot. At the number 4 spot is the Armour Gorgon. Now, this is a truck that I still own. I'm never going to part with this because I just love it too much. I just find it so much fun. I love the high centre of gravity. I love the fact that it's rear-wheel drive. The stock brush system also feels really nice right out the box. Now, that said, I did feel like I needed a little bit more power to make it even more fun, which is why I did a brushless conversion. Now, I've actually stolen the electronics from my Infraction 3S. I wasn't really using that car, which is why it made sense to put them in this. Now, since these trucks were released, availability has been a little bit difficult for us here in the UK, although as far as I'm aware, everyone else across the world doesn't seem to be having any issues. And for some reason, spare parts are crazy expensive. I think it's like £45 for a slipper clutch, and in my opinion, that is an insane amount of money. Now, because spares are so expensive at the moment, that's making people go out and buy the full truck just to use as a spares car. And unfortunately, by people doing that means there's even less of these trucks available. If you're looking to get into the RC hobby, I think this is a very solid choice, as long as you can actually get one. So moving on to number 3, here we have the Rolalo Omni Terminator. And this is another controversial RC truck. I do love my controversial RC cars. So why is this truck so controversial? Well, it's all to do with its size. So many people, including myself, thought this was going to be a proper 1/10 scale car. I love how Rolalo have tried to dress this thing up to make it look like a 1/10 scale truck. I think they've even put mini 1/10 on their website. Take it from me, it is a 1/12 scale. All you see there is a little bit of clever marketing, and when you compare this to some of the really popular options out there, you can quite clearly see how much smaller it is. So why does it deserve a place at number 3? Well, this is actually one of the best handling, affordable RC cars you can buy. It's incredibly well built. Rolalo are known for producing some really high quality cars. For a budget brand, you really can't go wrong. Now, yes, Rolalo did have some issues in the past when it comes to shipping. There were some issues there, but as far as I'm aware, that has been sorted now. So we know these trucks handle really well. I've tested the carbon brushless version and of course this metal version. The version I have here has the less powerful brushless system in it, but that said, 2S performance was still really good, and so was 3S. I think 3S, in my opinion, is a little bit more fun. Off-road performance was also really good, and it's definitely one of the best handling budget cars I've driven. Now, in my opinion, these are actually priced really well as well. Now, I'm actually giving you guys the chance to win this truck. all you need to do is head over to raffle after this video. So moving on to number 2, and we have another really controversial RC truck. Yes, I really do love my controversial RC cars. Now MJX sent these trucks out to creators, even though they knew that these trucks weren't quite perfect. Now they did send out an email listing out all the problems that this truck currently has. Now after this email got sent out, of course that caused a lot of people to start talking. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this truck caused a lot of trouble. Now myself and a lot of other channels actually chose to review it anyway, even though we knew that there was going to be issues with this truck, and that's because they were very minor issues, some basic changes that they need to make on their next version. Now I think we've talked enough about the negativity. Let's talk about the good stuff. Let's talk about why this truck is at the number 2 spot. Now there's one really important thing to talk about when it comes to the 10208, and that is it is a proper 1/10 scale platform. Now what they've done is basically take the smaller brother and make it a lot bigger. Now we've all been waiting for so long for a budget RC company to give us a proper 1/10 scale platform. Not a mini 1/10, not a 1/12, a proper 1/10 scale platform. And that's exactly what MJX have done. They've given us something we've all been craving, and they've also managed to give it to us at a very decent price. Now I did test this out on road and off road. Let's take a look at the 3S speed test first. Let's see what we can get on 3S. Let's bring it back and find out. What do we think? Is this going to be more than 30 miles per hour? I think it is. I think it's going to be more. So let's hit stop and read. 34 miles per hour right out the box on 3S. So not too bad. Let's take a look at the 4S speed test. Full throttle again. Right, let's bring it back. Let's see how it's done. Are we going to see 50 plus, which if we do is an incredible speed. I actually think we're going to see mid 40s. So let's hit stop and read. 47 miles per hour out the box, stock gearing on 4S. 4S on this truck is really fun, and you'll be pleased to know it handles it really well. Now off-road performance is where this truck suffers a little bit. It doesn't quite have the ground clearance of the Maverick Quantum 2 Flux or the Armour Gorgon. This is kind of like a 1/10 scale truggy more than a monster truck. I also think handling could be improved if it was slightly wider. These are all things that they're going to be addressing in the version 2, but I still think this version, the 1.1, is still going to be a solid option until the version 2 is released. Now don't worry, if you do go for this one, the version 1.1, there should be a version 2 conversion kit released at a later time, and you should be able to turn this truck into a version 2 really easily. Now even though this wasn't perfect off-road, I still managed to have a lot of fun with it. I definitely think this truck deserves the number 2 spot because there isn't a lot out there on the 1/10 scale platform that is 3S to 4S ready. You have got the fantastic team associated rival MT10, but unfortunately that's just not as affordable as it used to be. And it's a real shame because that truck is absolutely bomb-proof. It's one of the best 3S bashers out there. I just wish Team Associated kept the prices down. Now because the MT10 isn't as affordable as it used to be, I haven't included it on this list. Now this is a fantastic truck, even the version 1.1. Please don't let all the stuff you've heard about this truck online put you off. So here we go, the number 1 affordable RC car in 2024 is still the king. Of course it has to be the MJX Mini Truggy. I always forget all the numbers, but it's the 14210. Now hang on a minute, you may be thinking, this is a lot smaller than all of the other trucks I featured on this list so far. Yes, it is smaller, but that does have some benefits. Now you can throw this thing in a backpack. This will also keep up with some much larger trucks. As you see in my full review, it is priced incredibly well considering how well it performs. It's also really quick on 2S and on 3S, reaching speeds close to 50 miles per hour. I also think it's one of the coolest little cars we've seen in a long time. And although it doesn't handle as well as some of the larger trucks on this list, it definitely does a really good job. This little truggy is still the most affordable and best way into the RC hobby in my opinion. You're You're literally ready to go right out the box. Everything you need is included. They even include a set of paddle tyres. MJX smashed it with this little truggy. Now again, it is at the #1 spot because it does offer really good performance for the price. If you've just watched this part of the video and you're thinking, hang on a minute, some of those trucks were quite expensive. The RC hobby is expensive, sometimes very expensive. The 5 options you see in that video are actually considered to be cheaper options. You may be looking at some of the prices of those cars that I mentioned and you're thinking, hang on a minute, they're far too expensive. Now look, you can still get some really good options under $100. I've done loads of videos on my channel showing people some of the really good options. I'll leave some links down below if you are one of those people, you want to get into the hobby but you don't really want to spend anything more than $100. There are some pretty cool options out there, so they're definitely worth checking out. So that's it, we've finally come to the end of this video, and I know it was a long one, and if you've watched all the way through until now, give yourself a massive pat on the back because I know there's a lot of stuff to take in. I really hope this video was helpful to beginners who are just starting out in the hobby. Hopefully you feel a little bit more confident about things, especially when it comes to lipos and trying to pick out your first RC car. I know it can be confusing at times, but I think I've covered most of the main points. We need to get as many people into the hobby as possible. There's no reason it has to be difficult, but I do understand sometimes it can be confusing. And with a lot of RC clubs closing down and RC stores not always willing to help as they're so focused on the online side of things, it is hard for beginners to get the right advice, and it is hard for beginners to know where to start. Over the years I've learned so much from just doing it rather than worrying about it too much, especially when it comes to the Nitro side of the hobby. And if you've watched my last few videos, you'll know about the struggles with Nitro. The RC hobby is a brilliant hobby, it brings people together, it's great for your mental health, and it's also a really good way to connect with your kids, because the kids getting into the hobby are the ones who are going to keep this hobby alive for years to come. Now if you enjoyed this video or you got anything out of it, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Cheers for watching and good luck getting into one of the best hobbies around.